If you're watching this, it means you've recently acquired a time machine. I assume you're planning a visit to ancient Rome, probably Imperial Rome at its height, somewhere around 100 to 150 CE, when the city had swelled to over 1 million people and the empire stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. It's an ambitious choice, I'll give you that. Rome at this period is massive, chaotic, multilingual, and absolutely teeming with life. It's also dangerous, disease-ridden, and quite unlike anything you've probably imagined from those sword and sandal movies. But if you're prepared, really prepared, it can be an unforgettable experience. Consider this your jumping off point. You'll need to do additional research on your own, especially about the specific neighbourhood you plan to visit in the exact year you're targeting. But this should give you the essentials. First things first, let's talk about your health, because this is genuinely the most serious concern you're going to face. Ancient Rome is a public health nightmare by modern standards, and you need to be as prepared as medically possible before you step foot in that city. Get vaccinated for absolutely everything your doctor will give you. Typhoid, hepatitis A and B, tetanus, polio, every available vaccine. And even then, understand that it won't be enough. You're almost certainly going to get sick. I'm not trying to scare you, but I want you to be realistic about this. The most likely problem you'll face is gastrointestinal distress. Your body has been raised in a relatively sterile environment with treated water and refrigerated food. Your gut flora is what we might call naive. It's never encountered the bacterial ecosystem that existed in ancient Rome. When you start eating their food and drinking their water, your digestive system is going to have opinions about that, and those opinions will be loud and unpleasant. Bring anti-diarrheal medication. Bring a lot of it. Consider bringing antibiotics if your doctor will prescribe them for travel. Stay as hydrated as you can manage. Water is actually one of your biggest concerns. Rome is famous for its aqueducts, and yes, they're impressive feats of engineering, but the water quality varies enormously depending on which aqueduct it came from and how it's been stored. Some of the aqueducts drew from relatively clean sources in the hills, while others pulled from rivers that were already contaminated by upstream activity. Once the water reached Rome, it flowed into fountains and public basins, where it could sit for hours in the Mediterranean heat, becoming a lovely warm breeding ground for all sorts of interesting microorganisms. The wealthy had private water supplies piped directly into their homes through lead pipes. Yes, lead, which presents its own set of problems. But most people collected water from public fountains. If you must drink water, try to drink it from a fountain where the water is flowing continuously and hasn't been, sitting stagnant. Better yet, drink wine. Romans diluted their wine with water, which made it safer than water alone because the alcohol provided some antimicrobial effect. It won't be enough to fully protect you, but it's better than nothing. Beyond gastrointestinal issues, you need to worry about malaria. Rome and the surrounding countryside had endemic malaria, particularly in the summer months and in the lower-lying areas near the Tiber River. The Romans called it bad air, malaria, because they noticed it was associated with swampy areas, though of course they didn't understand it was transmitted by mosquitoes. If you're visiting in summer, take anti-malarial medication. Consult with a travel medicine specialist about this. They'll probably look at you very strangely when you tell them you're going to ancient Rome, but push through that awkwardness and get the prescription. There's also plague to consider. Not the Black Death. That doesn't arrive in Europe until the 1300s, but various epidemic diseases that swept through Rome periodically. The Antonine Plague hit around 165-180 CE and killed millions across the empire. If you're targeting your visit to the early to mid-2nd century, you need to research whether you'll be arriving during a plague year. If there's an active epidemic, I'd strongly suggest reconsidering your travel dates. You do not want to be in Rome during a plague outbreak. I cannot stress this enough. Now, I'm not a doctor, obviously. I'm a historian with an interest in keeping time travellers alive long enough to write interesting trip reports. So genuinely, truly, go talk to a healthcare professional before you attempt this journey. Tell them you're going somewhere with no modern sanitation, suspect water, and diseases that have been eradicated in the modern world. They'll understand what you're dealing with, even if you can't be completely honest about the time travel aspect. Let's move on to personal safety, which is going to require just as much attention as your health. Rome is a city where crime is rampant, and violent crime is not at all uncommon. The city had a population of over 1 million people crammed into a relatively small area, with enormous wealth inequality and no professional police force to speak of. There were the vigils, who were primarily firefighters but also did some law enforcement work, and there were the urban cohorts, military units stationed in the city to keep order, but their presence was nothing like a modern police force. Most of the time, if someone robbed you or assaulted you, there would be no one coming to help. So here's the critical rule. Travel in a group. Do not go to Rome alone. You need companions, both for practical reasons and for social reasons I'll get to in a moment. A lone traveller is a target. You're someone who can be mugged, robbed, beaten, or worse, and there won't be consequences for the perpetrator because you don't have a social network in the city to retaliate on your behalf. This is fundamentally important to understand about Roman society. People were protected by belonging to social networks. If you harmed someone, you had to worry about their family coming after you, or their patron, or their guild, or their military unit, or whatever group they belonged to. This web of social obligations and potential retaliation was what kept society from descending into complete chaos. As a stranger with no connections, you have no such protection. Keep your valuables on your person at all times. Rome is full of professional pickpockets, cut-purses and thieves who are very, very good at what they do. If you set something down, even for a moment, it will vanish. Don't assume you can leave your belongings in your room at an inn and find them there when you return. Carry your money in a pouch worn under your clothing, close to your skin. Carry a dagger. I'm serious about this. Most people in Rome carried some kind of knife or small blade for self-defense, and you should too. You don't need to be an expert swordsman. Honestly, if you don't know how to use a sword, don't bring one because you'll just hurt yourself. But a dagger is simple enough. Keep it visible but not threatening. It's a deterrent more than anything else. Be especially careful at night. Rome had no street lighting, so once the sun went down, the city was pitch black except for the occasional torch or lamp someone might be carrying. The darkness was profound in a way that's hard for modern people to understand. Walking around Rome at night is asking for trouble. People would throw their waste out of windows into the streets below without warning. Yes, including human waste, and you could easily get hit by falling refuse if you're walking below. More seriously, nighttime was when criminals operated most freely. If you absolutely must be out after dark, travel with your group, carry a torch, and stick to main streets where there might be other people around. Now, let's talk about money, because you'll need it for literally everything. Rome operated on a silver-based currency system, with some gold and bronze coins in circulation as well. The main unit of currency you'll be dealing with is the denarius, a silver coin that was roughly equivalent to a day's wages for a labourer. There were also smaller bronze coins, the as, the dupondius, the sestertius, which you'd use for smaller purchases. The aureus was the gold coin, worth 25 denarii, but you probably won't need to carry those unless you're presenting yourself as quite wealthy, which I don't recommend for safety reasons. The thing about Roman coinage is that the actual metal content determined value. People would check coins by biting them, weighing them, or examining them closely to assess purity, because over time emperors had debased the currency by reducing the silver content. By the time you're visiting, the denarius has maybe 80-85% silver content depending on exactly when. You arrive, and that percentage keeps dropping through the later imperial period. So don't be surprised if merchants scrutinize your coins carefully before accepting them. They're looking for clipped coins, forgeries, or heavily debased pieces. How much money should you bring? That depends on how long you're staying and what kind of lifestyle you're trying to maintain. A loaf of bread might cost you half an as to an ace. A simple meal at a thermopolium, that's basically a Roman fast food counter, could cost you anywhere from a couple of asses to a few sestertii depending on what you order. A night at a very basic inn might run you several sestertii, more if you want anything approaching comfort. If you're planning to attend the gladiatorial games or the chariot races, admission to the Colosseum was actually free for most events because they were state-sponsored, but getting good seats might require paying someone off, and you definitely want to buy food and drink from vendors. Figure out your budget ahead of time, and bring more than you think you'll need. You'll need to acquire Roman coins before you go, obviously. I assume your time machine came with some guidance on this, or perhaps you have access to a museum collection you can borrow from. Make sure you've got a good mix of denominations, heavy on the smaller bronze coins because those are what you'll use most frequently for daily purchases. Alright, so you've got your health situation managed as well as possible, you're travelling with companions for safety, and you've got pockets full of Roman coins. Now we need to talk about the social structure you're walking into, because this is going to be deeply weird for modern people, and you need to be prepared for it. Roman society was intensely hierarchical, in ways that are going to make you profoundly uncomfortable if you come from an egalitarian culture. Everyone was ranked, everyone knew their place, and social interactions were governed by this ranking system. At the top you had the emperor and the imperial family, then the senatorial class, the super wealthy elite who owned vast estates and held political power. Below them were the equestrians, wealthy businessmen and officials who didn't have quite the same political status, but were still very much part of the upper class. Then you had the common freeborn citizens, the plebs, who ranged from relatively prosperous shopkeepers and craftsmen down to the very poor. Below them were freedmen, former slaves who had been manumitted and who occupied a complex social position. And at the bottom were slaves, who made up somewhere between 20 and 40% of Rome's population, depending on whose estimate you believe. Here's what you need to understand. When Romans met someone, they needed to immediately assess where that person fit in the hierarchy, because it determined how they would interact. If you met someone of higher status, you were expected to show deference. You might step aside. To let them pass, you'd use respectful language. You might even need to bow or show physical signs of respect. If you met someone of a lower status, you could expect deference from them. The problem you're going to face is that people won't know where you fit. They're going to be trying to figure you out based on your clothing, your accent, your companions, and how you carry yourself. This is why your backstory is so important, and why your clothing matters enormously. We'll get to both of those in detail later, but for now just understand that you can't simply show up in Rome and expect to blend in as a generic person. There is no such thing as a generic person in Rome. Everyone is part of some network, some class, some category, and people need to know which category you're in so they know how to treat you. The social network issue I mentioned earlier, this is also why travelling in a group helps. If you're with other people, Romans will assume you're part of their social unit, whatever that might be. You could be travelling merchants, a familiar travelling with a patron, soldiers on leave, pilgrims heading to a temple. The group gives you a social context that makes sense to Romans. A lone individual wandering around with no apparent connections is deeply strange and suspicious. Let me talk about language for a moment, because this is both easier and harder than you might think. The official language of Rome is Latin, obviously, but Rome is a polyglot city. You'll hear Greek everywhere. Greek was the language of culture and education, and many Romans were bilingual in Latin and Greek. You'll also hear Aramaic, Egyptian, various Celtic languages, Germanic languages, North African languages, and countless others, because Rome is the capital of an enormous empire, and people from all over the Mediterranean and beyond have found their way to the city. The Latin you'll hear on the streets is not the classical Latin you might have studied in school. That formal, literary Latin was for written texts and formal speeches. What people actually spoke was vulgar Latin, vulgar just meaning common here, which was looser in grammar, had different pronunciation, and included a lot of slang and colloquialisms that varied by region and social class. If you've studied classical Latin, you'll be able to make yourself understood, but you're going to sound oddly formal, rather like someone who learned English from Shakespeare and is trying to use it to order coffee. Greek is actually your secret weapon here. If you know ancient Greek or even modern Greek with some study of the ancient form, you can get by remarkably well. Many educated Romans spoke Greek, and in the eastern provinces Greek was often more common than Latin. If you present yourself as a Greek-speaking visitor from the Eastern Empire, let's say from Ephesus or Antioch, people will just assume your Latin is imperfect because Greek is your native tongue, and they'll be more forgiving of errors. Here's something that will help you. Romans were accustomed to language barriers and dealing with people who didn't speak Latin fluently. The empire was full of people learning Latin as a second or third language. Merchants, soldiers, slaves, freedmen, all of them came from different linguistic backgrounds. So if you make mistakes, if your grammar is off, if you have a strange accent, people won't be shocked by it. They'll just assume you're from somewhere else in the empire, which is exactly what you want them to think. Now, about clothing. This is absolutely critical, and I cannot stress enough how much thought you need to put into what you wear. Your clothing tells everyone who sees you what your social status is, what your occupation might be, where you're from, and how they should interact with you. Get this wrong, and you'll have problems. For most people visiting Rome, I'd recommend dressing as a modest member of the middle classes, a merchant perhaps, or a craftsman of some kind. For men, this means a tunic that falls to about the knees, made of undyed or simply dyed wool or linen. The tunic should be belted at the waist. Over this, if you want to look a bit more respectable, you could wear a toga. But here's the thing about togas. They're incredibly impractical. They're hard to put on correctly, they're hot, and they restrict your movement. Most ordinary Romans didn't wear togas for daily activities. Togas were for formal occasions, for appearing in public in an official capacity, for going to the forum on business. If you wear a toga, you're making a statement about your status as a Roman citizen, and you're signalling that you're engaged in serious civic business. That might be more attention than you want. If you're not wearing a toga, you might wear a cloak called a penula or a lacerna, which is basically a semicircular piece of fabric that you drape over your shoulders and pin at the neck. This is practical, and it's what people actually wore when moving around the city. Make sure your tunic is clean but not ostentatiously new or fine. You want to look respectable but not wealthy. Wealthy people attract thieves and also attract attention, and you don't want either. For women, the situation is similar. A long tunic called a stola, typically reaching the ankles, with a palla, which is a large rectangular shawl that you drape over your head and shoulders. The palla serves both as a garment and as a head covering, which was expected for respectable women in public. Hair should be covered or elaborately styled in a way that's appropriate to your supposed status. Simple is better. Elaborate hairstyles marked you as wealthy and fashionable, which again is probably more attention than you want. Colour matters too. Purple was restricted to the imperial family and the highest ranks of society. If you show up wearing purple, you'll either be arrested for impersonation or assumed to be someone incredibly important, neither of which you want. Stick to natural undyed fabrics, or simple colours like brown, grey, yellow, red. Avoid bright, expensive-looking dyes. Your sandals should be simple leather, nothing fancy. If you're presenting as someone of modest means, you might even go barefoot in certain contexts, though I personally wouldn't recommend it given the state of Roman streets. Let's talk about religion for a moment, because Rome is a deeply religious society, and you'll encounter religious practice everywhere you go. Romans practiced polytheism. They worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, had household gods, neighbourhood gods, gods for every conceivable aspect of life. Religion was woven into daily existence. People made offerings at household shrines in the morning, dropped coins in temple collection boxes, participated in neighbourhood festivals, attended large public ceremonies. The imperial cult, the worship of the emperor as a living god, or the worship of deceased deified emperors, was also a major part of civic religion, and refusing to participate in it could get you into serious trouble. As a visitor, you don't need to be an expert in Roman religion, but you do need to be respectful and you need to participate in public religious observances when appropriate. If there's a procession honouring Jupiter, you stand respectfully and watch. If everyone's making an offering at a neighbourhood shrine, you drop a small coin. If you're invited to someone's home and they make an offering to their household gods, the lares and penates, you participate quietly. Romans were generally tolerant of foreign gods and foreign religious practices. They actually incorporated a lot of foreign deities into their own pantheon, but they expected everyone to show respect for Roman gods in return. The one exception to Roman religious tolerance was Christianity, at least during certain periods. Christians refused to participate in the imperial cult because they believed in only one god, and considered emperor worship to be idolatry, which Romans interpreted as both religious impiety and political treason. The persecution of Christians was sporadic. Sometimes emperors cracked down hard, other times they mostly left Christians alone. But if you're visiting during a period of persecution, you need to be very careful if you have Christian leanings. Don't go around proselytizing, don't refuse to participate in civic cult activities, and don't draw attention to yourself by acting like you're morally superior to pagan practices. That will get you arrested, or worse. Judaism occupied an interesting position. Jews were generally allowed to practice their religion because Judaism was ancient and had special legal status, under Roman law, as a religio licita, a permitted religion. There was a substantial Jewish population in Rome, living primarily in Trastevere, the neighbourhood across the Tiber. However, there was also periodic anti-Jewish sentiment, and occasional expulsions of Jews. From the city, depending on the political climate and which emperor was in power. If you're Jewish and you want to visit the Jewish community in Rome, you can do that, but you'll need to dress appropriately and be prepared for the possibility of prejudice from non-Jews. If you'd rather not deal with that, you could present as a pagan or as a Christian, depending on what makes more sense for your backstory and the time period you're visiting. One more thing about religion before we move on. Rome is full of temples, shrines, and sacred spaces. Some of them are open to the public, some are restricted to priests or to members of particular cults. Don't just wander into every religious building you see. Observe what others are doing. If you see people removing their shoes before entering, you remove your shoes. If you see people making offerings, you make an offering. Watch and follow the lead of the locals. Romans took religious propriety very seriously, and violating sacred space or showing disrespect to the gods was considered dangerous, not just for you, but for the entire community. They believed the gods could punish the whole city for the impiety of one individual. Now let's talk about food and where you're going to eat, because you'll need to eat multiple times per day, and figuring out the food situation is actually more complicated than you might think. Romans typically ate 3 meals a day, though the timing and content varied by social class. Breakfast, intaculum, was usually light, maybe some bread dipped in wine, perhaps some cheese or olives. Lunch, prandium, was also fairly light, eaten around midday. The main meal was dinner, cena, eaten in the late afternoon or early evening, which could range from a simple bowl of pottage for the poor to an elaborate multi-course feast for the wealthy. For most of your meals, you'll probably be eating at thermopolia, which were sort of ancient Roman fast food counters. These were all over the city. We've found remains of dozens of them in Pompeii alone, so Rome probably had hundreds, if not thousands. A thermopolium typically had a counter facing the street with large clay jars, dolia, set into the counter, containing hot food and drink. You'd walk up to the counter, order what you wanted, and either eat it standing at the counter or take it with you. The food was cheap and filling, though not necessarily of the highest quality. You might get a bowl of pulse, which was a kind of porridge made from grain, or some stew with vegetables and maybe a bit of meat, or bread with cheese or olives. Wine was available, though it would be heavily watered down. Drinking undiluted wine was considered barbaric. The interesting thing about thermopolia is that they were primarily used by the poor and the lower classes. Most Romans didn't have kitchens in their homes. Apartment buildings had fire restrictions because of the enormous fire danger. So cooking at home wasn't always possible. The wealthy had kitchens with slaves to do the cooking, but ordinary people often bought their meals ready-made. So if you're eating at a thermopolium, you're participating in everyday Roman working-class life. If you're trying to present as someone more prosperous, you might seek out a proper tavern or restaurant, a copona or a popina, which would have seating and a somewhat more varied menu, though the clientele could be rough, and the establishments often doubled as brothels. These places had a bit of a shady reputation, to be honest. Respectable people didn't generally spend time lounging in taverns, so eating there would mark you as someone on the lower end of respectability. The other option is to buy food at markets and prepare it yourself, if you have somewhere to do that. Rome had multiple markets, the Forum Boarium for cattle, the Forum Holitorium for vegetables, various neighbourhood markets scattered through the city. You could buy bread from bakeries. There were hundreds of bakeries in Rome, which would be fresh and much better than anything you'd get at a thermopolium. You could buy fresh produce, cheese, olives, fish, if you were near the river, or if the fish market had a fresh catch brought in from Ostia. The food at markets would be fresher and of higher quality than thermopolium food, but then you'd need somewhere to cook it and the ability to do so. One thing to know about Roman food, it's going to taste different from what you're expecting, and not in a good way. They used a fermented fish sauce called garum in almost everything, and I mean everything. It's like a more pungent version of Southeast Asian fish sauce, and to modern palates it can be quite overwhelming. They also used a lot of vinegar, honey and herbs in combinations that seem strange to us. Don't expect tomatoes. Those are from the New World and won't arrive in Europe for another 1500 years or so. Same with potatoes, corn, chocolate, vanilla, most peppers. The Roman diet was based on wheat, barley, olive oil, wine, vegetables like onions, garlic, cabbage, beans, and fruits like grapes, figs, apples, pears. Meat was available but expensive, so most people ate it sparingly. The poor subsisted mainly on grain porridge, bread and vegetables with occasional fish or very cheap cuts of meat. Worry about the food safety. Nothing is refrigerated, obviously. Food is sitting out in the Mediterranean heat covered in flies. Meat could be days old. The oil used for cooking might be rancid. Garum is basically rotten fish, and while fermentation does provide some preservation, it's still a bit risky. Your digestive system is going to rebel against this food. Stick to bread when you can. It's baked fresh daily and is probably the safest option. Avoid raw fruits and vegetables unless you can wash them in water you trust, which is to say, avoid them. Stick to cooked food when possible. Boiling kills most pathogens, so stews and porridge are reasonably safe bets. Wine is safer than water, as I mentioned earlier, because the alcohol kills some bacteria. And speaking of water, we should talk about that in a bit more detail. The aqueducts bring water into the city from various sources in the hills around Rome. The water flows through channels to the city, where it's distributed to public fountains, bathhouses, wealthy private homes, and various public facilities. The quality of the water depends on which aqueduct it came from. The Aqua Marcia, for instance, was considered the best. Cold, clear water from clean sources. The Aqua Alciatina was known to be of poor quality, and was mainly used for watering gardens and supplying the Naumachia, the artificial lake where they staged naval battles. If you ask someone, they can probably tell you which fountain draws from which aqueduct, and you should try to find one supplied by Marcia or another good source. The problem is that once water comes out of the fountain, what happens to it? People fill containers and carry it home, where it sits in ceramic jars, often in warm rooms, sometimes for days. That water is a microbiological experiment you do not want to participate in. If you must drink water someone offers you in their home, try to at least drink water that's been recently drawn from a fountain. Better yet, stick to wine, as I keep saying, which was the daily beverage for most Romans anyway. Even children drank watered-down wine because it was safer than water. So now that you know where to find food and how to avoid dying of gastrointestinal catastrophe, let's discuss where you're going to sleep, because this is surprisingly important and more complicated than you might expect. Your options depend heavily on the social class you're presenting as and how much money you want to spend. If you're travelling as someone of modest means, which I recommend for all the safety reasons we've discussed, you'll probably be staying at an inn, a cupona or a hospitium. These establishments were scattered throughout Rome, particularly near the gates and along major roads, catering to travellers and merchants. The quality varies wildly. Some are relatively clean and safe, others are absolutely filthy flophouses where you'll be sharing a room with strangers and possibly livestock. At the cheaper inns, you might be sleeping on a straw mattress in a communal room with a dozen other people, and your belongings will absolutely not be safe. Keep your money on your person even while you sleep. The better inns have private rooms, but they're more expensive and they still won't be what you'd consider comfortable by modern standards. There's no running water in the rooms, no bathroom facilities. You'll be using a chamber pot or going down the hall to a communal latrine. The beds are typically wooden frames with leather straps stretched across, covered with a thin mattress stuffed with straw or wool. Bring your own blanket if you have one. The rooms are small, dark, and in summer they're stifling hot. In winter they're cold and draughty. Many inns also double as taverns and brothels, so expect noise at all hours, drunken singing, arguments, sounds of commercial transactions through thin walls. If you're presenting as someone more prosperous, you might be able to arrange accommodation in a private home. Romans had a cultural practice of hospitality called hospitium, where travellers could stay with friends or business associates, or people they had connections with through their social networks. Of course, you don't actually have those connections, but if you've created a good enough backstory and you've made the right contacts, you might be able to arrange something. The advantage of staying in a private home is security and comfort. You're under someone's roof, part of their household temporarily, which offers protection. The disadvantage is that you'll be expected to participate in household life, make offerings to their household gods, socialise with the family, and generally behave as a proper guest, which means understanding Roman etiquette in much more detail than you would as an anonymous inn guest. Another option, depending on your backstory, would be to stay at a temple or with a religious community. Some temples offered accommodation for pilgrims and travellers, though this was less formalised in Rome than it would become in the Christian medieval period. If you're presenting as a worshipper coming to honour a particular god, you might be able to arrange lodging through temple authorities. This would be safest in terms of security, but would require you to participate in religious observances and to actually know something about the cult you're claiming to be devoted to. There's one more accommodation option I should mention, though it requires careful consideration: the baths. Now, I don't mean sleeping in the baths, that would be bizarre and impossible, but the baths are where you'll go for daily hygiene, and they're also major social centres, so let me explain how they work, because you absolutely need to understand Roman bathing culture. The baths, thermae or balnea, were central to Roman life in a way that's difficult for modern people to grasp. They weren't just about getting clean. They were social clubs, exercise facilities, libraries, lecture halls, shopping centres, and de facto town squares all rolled into one. Rome had hundreds of bathhouses ranging from small neighbourhood baths to enormous imperial complexes like the Baths of Trajan or the Baths of Caracalla, which could accommodate thousands of people at once. Most Romans went to the baths daily, in the afternoon after work. Entry was very cheap, a quadrans, the smallest bronze coin, or sometimes free at the imperial baths because emperors subsidised them as a public service. Here's how it worked. You'd enter through the apoditerium, the changing room, where you'd remove your clothes and leave them in a cubby or hand them to an attendant. Theft was absolutely rampant in the baths, so if you brought a slave or a companion, they'd watch your belongings. Otherwise, you'd hope for the best and not bring anything valuable. Once undressed, and yes, Romans bathed naked, men and women separately with different hours or different sections, you'd move through a series of rooms with different temperatures. The tepidarium was warm, the caldarium was hot and steamy, heated by underground furnaces with hot water pools. After sweating in the heat, you'd move to the frigidarium, the cold room with cold plunge pools. The temperature changes were believed to be healthy. Romans didn't use soap in the way we do. They'd oil their skin with olive oil, exercise or just sit and sweat, then scrape the oil, sweat and dirt off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. Slaves or bath attendants could do this for you if you paid. The water in the pools was not changed regularly, by the way. You're bathing in water that hundreds of other people have bathed in that day. Try not to think about it too hard. The hot water probably killed some of the bacteria, but probably not enough. This is another disease vector you're just going to have to accept. The baths were extremely social. People chatted, made business deals, gossiped, showed off their bodies, exercised in the palaestra, the exercise courtyard, played ball games, got massaged, had their body hair plucked by attendants, visited libraries, attended lectures or poetry readings. The baths were loud, crowded and chaotic. There was splashing, shouting, laughter, singing, vendors hawking snacks and drinks, the sound of balls hitting walls, the scraping of strigils. It was sensory overload. But if you want to understand daily Roman life, you absolutely must visit the baths. That's where ordinary Romans spent their leisure time, where they socialised, where they connected with their community. You'll learn more about Roman culture in an afternoon at the baths than in a week of wandering the Forum. Now let's talk about shopping and markets, because you'll need to acquire things during your visit and you need to understand how commercial transactions work. First thing to know, everything is negotiable. There are no fixed prices. Every purchase is a negotiation, a haggling process. The vendor will quote you a price. You'll offer something lower, they'll act offended and come down slightly, you'll come up slightly, eventually you'll reach an agreement somewhere in the middle. If you just accept the first price quoted, you'll be marked as a fool, and every merchant in that marketplace will fleece you. The problem you face is that you don't actually know what things should cost, and Roman merchants will absolutely take advantage of that. They can smell a naive foreigner from across the market. Your strange accent, your uncertainty, your unfamiliarity with local prices, all of these mark you as an easy target. Try to observe transactions before making your own purchases. Watch how locals haggle, what prices they settle on. Don't be afraid to walk away if you think the price is unreasonable. Often the vendor will call you back with a better offer. Rome has multiple market areas. The Forum Romanum is the civic and religious centre of the city, with temples and government buildings, but also shops in the Tabernale, the small shops that line the edges of the Forum. This is where you might buy higher quality goods or specialty items. The Forum Boarium, near the Tiber, is the cattle market and also has general trading. The Forum Holitorium is the vegetable market. There are also neighbourhood markets scattered throughout the city, and travelling vendors who set up temporary stalls in any open space. The best bargains are probably at neighbourhood markets early in the morning when produce is fresh and vendors are motivated to sell. The worst prices are late in the day when selection is picked over and vendors are tired. What kind of things might you need to buy? Food, obviously, which we've discussed. You might want to buy a better cloak or some warmer clothing if you arrived unprepared for the weather. You might need sandals if yours wear out. Rome's paved streets are hard on footwear. You might want to buy small offerings to leave at temples, things like incense or small figurines or food items to sacrifice. You might want souvenirs, though be careful about trying to bring Roman artefacts back to your own time because that raises all sorts of temporal paradox issues that I'm not qualified to advise you on. One thing you absolutely should buy: a set of Roman-style writing tablets if you want to take notes. These were wooden boards with a wax surface that you'd write on with a metal stylus. The wax could be smoothed out and reused. Every literate Roman used these for daily notes, correspondence, calculations. If you're seen with modern paper or a modern notebook, that will attract attention and questions you don't want to answer. Get a wax tablet and stylus, and use those if you need to write anything down. Let me circle back to clothing for a moment, because I feel like I didn't give you enough detail before. What you wear matters so much that I want to make absolutely sure you understand this. Clothing in Rome was a marker of status, occupation, citizenship, and even moral character. Wearing the wrong thing could get you into serious trouble, while wearing the right thing could open doors for you. For free Roman citizens, the toga was the defining garment, at least theoretically. The toga was a large, semicircular piece of woolen cloth, typically off-white or cream-coloured, that was draped around the body in a very specific way. Getting it on correctly required practice or assistance. The toga was uncomfortable, hot, heavy, and restrictive, but it marked you as a citizen and as someone participating in civic life. Here's the thing, though. By the imperial period, most Romans didn't wear togas regularly, unless they had to. Togas were for the forum, for law courts, for official business, for receiving clients in the morning salutatio. For everyday life, most men wore just the tunic. The colour and decoration of your toga communicated information. A plain toga virilis was what most adult citizens wore. A toga praetexta with a purple border was for magistrates and freeborn boys who hadn't come of age yet. A toga candida, whitened with chalk, was worn by men campaigning for political office. That's where we get the word candidate. A dark toga pulla was for mourning. If you're going to wear a toga at all, make sure it's a plain one with no decoration, because anything else puts you in a category that will invite questions you can't answer. The tunic was the everyday garment for both men and women, though styled differently. Men's tunics typically ended at the knee, while women's tunics, the stola, went to the ankle. Tunics were made of wool or linen, undyed or dyed in simple colours. The quality of the fabric and the style of the tunic told people about your status. A very fine, thin tunic of good linen or soft wool marked you as wealthy. A coarse, roughly woven tunic marked you as poor. Patches and visible repairs marked you as struggling. The length also mattered. Very short tunics that showed a lot of leg were associated with slaves and labourers who needed freedom of movement. Respectable men wore tunics that fell to at least mid-thigh. There were tunics with stripes. The angusticlavia had narrow purple stripes and was worn by equestrians. The laticlavia had broad purple stripes and was worn by senators. Don't wear either of these. If you show up in a striped tunic, you're claiming to be a member of the elite classes, and someone's going to ask you which family you belong to, and what your father's name is and who your patron is, and you won't have good answers. Footwear varied by status and situation. Most working people wore simple leather sandals or went barefoot. The calci were closed leather shoes or boots that senators and upper-class citizens wore with togas. They were a status marker. If you're wearing calce, you're claiming to be someone important. Stick with basic sandals, the kind with straps that lace up around the ankle. They're practical, comfortable, and they don't make any social claims about you. Let me talk about the backstory you need to create, because this is genuinely critical for your entire experience. You cannot just show up in Rome and wing it. Romans will ask you who you are, where you're from, what you're doing in Rome, who you know in the city, what your family does, what your occupation is. All of these questions are their way of situating you in their mental map of society. You need a coherent, plausible story that you've rehearsed and that you stick to consistently. I'd recommend presenting yourself as a merchant or the representative of a merchant house from somewhere in the eastern provinces. Ephesus would be a good choice. or Antioch, or Alexandria. These were major commercial cities with large populations and extensive trade networks, and people from those cities regularly visited Rome on business. This backstory explains why you speak Greek more fluently than Latin, why you're unfamiliar with Rome's layout and customs, why you don't have family connections in the city. You're there to make contacts, scout opportunities, purchase goods to ship back east, that sort of thing. What do you trade in? Pick something that's plausible but not too specialised. Textiles are a good option. Cloth from Egypt or silk from further east. Wine would work. Olive oil, glassware from Syria, papyrus from Egypt. Spices. Don't claim to deal in purple dye or in materials for imperial statues or anything that would put you in contact with the imperial household or the highest levels of society. You want to be a modest, middling merchant, prosperous enough to travel but not so wealthy that people expect you to be staying in a villa and travelling with an enormous entourage. You need to have a family history worked out. Invent a father who runs the family business back in Ephesus. Maybe mention a brother who handles the shipping side of things. Perhaps reference an uncle who got you started in the trade. These details make you real to Romans. They understand family businesses, apprenticeships, commercial networks built on kinship and trust. Don't make your invented family too important or too interesting. You want to be boring enough that people don't ask too many follow-up questions. Travelling in a group, as I've repeatedly emphasised, is essential. Your companions can support your backstory. They're your fellow merchants, your assistants, your business partners, whatever makes sense. Coach them on the backstory so everyone tells the same story. Romans will absolutely try to verify your story by asking your companions separately, so consistency is crucial. Here's something that might surprise you. You shouldn't bring a lot of modern items with you, even things that seem harmless. Obviously don't bring anything electronic that makes noise or lights up. A beeping watch, a phone, anything like that would cause immediate problems. But even things like modern fabric could cause issues. Romans know what wool, linen, silk, cotton and leather look, feel and smell like. If you've got a synthetic fabric jacket or shoes made with rubber soles or a plastic zipper, those materials will strike them as deeply strange. They might not immediately jump to witchcraft or time traveller, but they'll definitely notice and ask questions, and you don't have good answers. Your time machine, obviously hide it completely. Bury it near your arrival point or conceal it somewhere extremely secure. Do not carry it with you into the city. If someone discovers it and figures out what it does, best case scenario is they try to steal it and sell it. Worst case is they assume you're practicing some form of dangerous sorcery and you get turned into authorities. Don't bring modern medicine bottles, eyeglasses in modern frames, watches, cameras, audio equipment, or anything else that's obviously anachronistic. If you need medication, transfer it to a simple leather pouch or a clay jar. If you wear glasses, try to get frames that could pass as some exotic foreign design. Or better yet, see if you can get contact lenses. If you must bring something modern, make sure it's small, easily concealed, and that you only use it in complete privacy. Books are another potential problem. If you bring a modern book, the paper quality, the printing, the binding, all of it is wrong. Romans used papyrus scrolls or wax tablets for writing, and books in the modern sense with bound pages weren't common yet. If you want to bring reference materials, handwrite them on papyrus or on wax tablets before you go. Make them look period appropriate. Now let's talk about social etiquette in a bit more detail because there are so many ways to offend people, or mark yourself as strange if you don't understand Roman social customs. Romans were very focused on gestures, body language and physical interaction in ways that will seem uncomfortably intimate to modern people. Greetings involved physical contact. Men would grasp each other's right forearms or hands in greeting. Kissing on the cheek was common between friends and family. If you were greeting someone of much higher status, you might kiss their hand or even fall to your knees in extreme cases, though that was more common in the eastern provinces where people were accustomed to monarchical forms. Standing too far away from someone you're talking to, avoiding eye contact, not touching them, all of these things that might seem polite or respectful to modern sensibilities could seem cold and strange to Romans. At the same time, there was a rigid hierarchy about who could initiate contact. A social inferior didn't slap a social superior on the back or kiss them on the cheek unless invited to do so. You waited for the higher status person to make the gesture first. Since you'll be a stranger and your status will be uncertain, watch what others do and follow their lead. If someone extends their hand to you, grasp their forearm in return. If someone leans in to kiss your cheek, accept it. Don't flinch or pull away. That's insulting. Personal space is much smaller in Rome than in modern Western cultures. People stand close when talking, they touch each other frequently, they're physically demonstrative. The baths, which we discussed, are a perfect example of how comfortable Romans were with nudity and physical proximity. Getting comfortable with this level of physical closeness is important if you want to fit in. I'm not saying you have to love it, but you do have to tolerate it without showing discomfort. Dining etiquette is another area where you can reveal yourself as strange if you're not careful. Romans typically reclined on couches to eat their main meal, propped up on their left elbow, eating with their right hand. They didn't use forks. Those wouldn't become common until much later. You ate with your fingers or with a spoon for liquid dishes. There was usually a slave standing by with water and towels for washing your hands between courses. Food was served on shared platters, and you took portions with your hands. Belching during a meal was considered acceptable, even a compliment to the host. Table manners were much more relaxed than Victorian or modern standards, but there were still rules. You didn't reach across someone else. You didn't take the best pieces without offering them to higher status diners first. You didn't gorge yourself or drink too much wine and make a spectacle of yourself. The salutatio, the morning greeting ritual, was fundamental to the patron-client system that structured Roman society. Every morning clients would visit their patron's house to pay respects, and in return they might receive sportula, gifts of food or money. If you're staying in Rome for any length of time and you want to make contacts, you might need to participate in this system. That would require identifying a potential patron and presenting yourself as a client, which could be useful for security and social access, but would also create obligations. You'd be expected to attend your patron regularly, support them in public, vote for them if they sought office, do favours for them. It's a transactional relationship built on mutual obligation. Think carefully about whether you want to get involved in this system, or whether you'd rather remain independent and anonymous. Now, let's talk about arriving in ancient Rome, because the logistics of this matter enormously. You don't want anyone to see you appear out of thin air clutching a piece of futuristic technology, so you need to plan your arrival carefully. Rome is surrounded by countryside, farmland, pastures, wooded areas, hills. Pick a spot several miles outside the city, somewhere secluded where you're unlikely to be observed. A wooded hillside would be ideal, or a ravine, or a field far from any farms. Arrive at night, ideally on a cloudy, moonless night when visibility is minimal. Romans didn't have flashlights or powerful lanterns, so nighttime travel was difficult and rare. Most people stayed home after dark because it was dangerous and impractical. Once you've arrived and hidden your time machine securely, wait until daylight to approach the city. You can sleep rough for a night if necessary. You wouldn't be the first traveller to do so. In the morning, approach along one of the main roads that lead into Rome. There are several major roads, the Via Appia, the Via Flaminia, the Via Aurelia, others, and they're always busy with traffic. Carts, pedestrians, animals, people travelling in and out of the city for business or market, or 1,000 other reasons. Join the flow of traffic. You're just one more merchant or traveller arriving in Rome. Nobody will question it because that's what these roads are for. Rome had gates in the old Servian wall, though by the imperial period the city had sprawled far beyond those walls. There might be customs officials at major gates checking wagons for taxable goods, but they're primarily interested in merchants bringing in commercial quantities of items, not individual travellers. Keep your head down, move with the crowd, and you'll be fine. Once you're inside the city, you can start navigating toward wherever you plan to stay. One last logistical point. Rome is enormous, and it's very easy to get lost. The city grew organically over centuries without any central planning, so streets twist and wind and dead-end unpredictably. There are no street signs, no maps posted on corners, no way to navigate except by landmarks and asking for directions. Major landmarks like the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, the various imperial fora, those are your reference points. Romans give directions in terms of these landmarks. Head toward the Circus Maximus, turn left at the Temple of Ceres, follow that street until you reach the fountain, then ask again. You'll be asking for directions constantly. This is normal and expected. Just be prepared for the fact that getting anywhere will take longer than you think, and you'll get lost repeatedly. Alright, here are a few final thoughts before you go. This trip is going to be harder than you think it is. Rome was a difficult place to live even for Romans, and you're going in with no real support network, no actual contacts, no authentic integration into the social fabric. You're going to be perpetually uncomfortable, probably frequently afraid, definitely sick at some point. The smells alone will be overwhelming. Human waste, animal waste, rotting garbage, smoke, sweat, fish sauce, all of it baking in Mediterranean heat. The noise will be incredible and incessant. The crowding will be claustrophobic. Ancient Rome was not a pleasant place by modern standards, but it was also one of the most fascinating, vibrant, complex cities in human history. 1 million people from every corner of the known world, speaking dozens of languages, practicing countless religions, engaged in trade and politics and culture and daily survival. If you can handle the discomfort and the danger, if you can navigate the social complexity and avoid getting yourself killed or arrested, you'll witness something genuinely extraordinary. You'll see the Roman Empire at its height, when it controlled the entire Mediterranean and seemed like it would last forever. You'll see the monuments before they became ruins, the statues painted in bright colours, the temples full of worshippers, the streets full of life. Just remember, be humble, be cautious, be respectful. Don't try to change history. Don't try to show off your superior knowledge. Don't draw attention to yourself. You're a visitor to their world, and your goal is to observe and learn and survive. If you can do that, you'll have an experience that almost no one in history has ever had. Now that you know what you need to know, it's time to turn on the machine and head back. Are you ready? You stand at the edge of the forest, the ancient oaks dark against the pre-dawn sky. Your companions are silent shadows beside you. In your hand, the device feels impossibly heavy. Ahead, somewhere beyond the hills, Rome waits, vast, ancient, teeming with 1 million souls who have no idea you're coming. You take a breath. The air smells of earth and leaves, the last pure breath of your own time. You activate the device. The world shudders, light bends, and everything shifts. You wake up. For a moment you don't know where you are. The ground beneath you is hard earth covered with fallen leaves. Your body aches. You slept in your clothes, curled against the base of a broad oak tree. The air is cool, carrying a dampness that speaks of morning dew. Your mouth tastes sour. You sit up slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the canopy above. It worked. You're here. The realization settles over you like a weight. Birds are calling in the trees, species you half recognize but can't quite name. The sound is clear, pure, uninterrupted by any mechanical noise. There are no cars, no planes, no distant hum of electricity or engines. The silence underneath the birdsong is profound, almost oppressive. You've never experienced quiet like this. The modern world, you realize suddenly, is never truly silent. One of your companions stirs, then another. No one speaks. You're all processing the same thing, the strangeness, the reality of where you are and when. After a moment, you push yourself to your feet. Your legs are stiff. The tunic you're wearing feels strange on your body, the wool coarse against your skin, the belt at your waist looser than you'd like. You adjust it with fingers that feel clumsy. The sky is beginning to lighten in the east. You need to wait for full daylight before approaching the city, so you pass the time checking your belongings. The leather pouch at your waist contains your coins. You can feel the weight of them, the hard edges of metal through the leather. Your companions do the same, everyone moving quietly, speaking in whispers when they speak at all. The forest around you is waking up. More birds join the chorus. Somewhere in the distance you hear what might be a rooster crowing. The sun rises slowly, spilling golden light through the trees. The air warms. You can see more clearly now. The forest around you is oak and pine, the undergrowth thick with ferns and brush. Through the trees to the east you can see open country, rolling hills covered with the green of early summer. And beyond that, barely visible in the morning haze, something massive and pale. Rome. You gather your things, exchange glances with your companions, and begin walking. The forest thins as you descend the hillside. Soon you're in open country. Fields of grain rippling in the morning breeze, olive groves with their silvery green leaves, vineyards climbing the slopes. The path you're following is well-worn, hard-packed earth that's seen countless feet. As you walk, you start to see other people. A farmer driving a cart pulled by 2 oxen, the wheels creaking rhythmically. He looks at you with mild curiosity but says nothing, just nods. You nod back. A woman carrying a basket on her head, walking with the kind of smooth, effortless balance that speaks of years of practice. Children running through a field, their laughter carrying across the distance. The morning sun climbs higher. You're sweating now, the wool of your tunic trapping heat against your body. The path joins a wider road, and the traffic increases. More carts, more people on foot, a few riders on horseback. Everyone is moving toward Rome, drawn by commerce or duty or family or 100 other reasons. You fall into the flow, just one more group of travellers heading for the city. And then you see it properly. Rome spreads across the landscape like nothing you've ever seen. The city is vast, a sprawling mass of buildings that covers hills and valleys as far as you can see. The structures are a riot of colours, red tile roofs, white marble temples catching the sun, the golden glint of bronze and gilt on public buildings. Rising above everything, dominating the eastern side of the city, is the Colosseum. The massive amphitheatre is almost shocking in its scale, its arches stacked 4 stories high, its curved walls stretching away into the distance. You've seen pictures, of course, but the reality of it is different. It's not a ruin. It's pristine, powerful, new. Smoke rises from thousands of cooking fires, creating a haze that hangs over the city. Even from here, miles away, you can smell it. Smoke, yes, but also something organic and pungent that you can't quite identify. As you get closer, the smell intensifies. The road becomes crowded. You're surrounded now by people and animals and carts and noise. A man driving a small herd of goats shouts at them in a language you don't understand. A woman selling vegetables from a basket calls out prices. 2 men argue about something, their voices rising in anger. Children dart between the adults playing some kind of chasing game. A dog trots past, ribs showing through its fur. You approach the city proper. Buildings begin to line the road. Workshops with their fronts open to the street. Small temples. Apartment blocks rising 3 and 4 stories high. The noise level increases with every step. Hammering from a smithy. The rhythmic thump of someone beating cloth at a fuller's shop. Voices calling and laughing and arguing. The clatter of cartwheels on stone pavement. Animals bleating and neighing and barking. Metal scraping on metal. Wood thudding against wood. 1,000 sounds layering over each. Other into a cacophony that makes your head spin. And the smell. Oh, the smell. The scent you couldn't identify before is clear now. It's human waste and animal waste mixed with smoke and cooking oil, and something sharp and fishy that must be garum and the sweat of thousands of bodies and rotting vegetables and urine. The fullers use urine in their cloth processing, you remember, and a dozen other scents you can't separate. It's overwhelming, almost physical, catching in your throat. You see one of your companions cover their mouth and nose with a fold of their cloak. You resist the urge to do the same, not wanting to draw attention. The street you're on is paved now with large stones, worn smooth by centuries of traffic. The spaces between the stones are filled with something dark and organic that you try not to examine too closely. People are emptying chamber pots out of upper-story windows, just tossing the contents into the street below. You have to stay alert to avoid being hit. Streams of liquid run down the gutters at the edges of the street, trickling toward drainage channels. Your sandals squelch through things you don't want to think about. The buildings press close on either side now, multiple stories high, blocking out some of the morning sun. Laundry hangs from windows and balconies, flapping in the breeze. The apartment blocks, insulo, you remember they're called, are massive structures that house hundreds of people. The ground floors are shops and workshops, open to the street, while the upper floors are divided into smaller and smaller apartments. You can see into some of them through open windows, a glimpse of a woman stirring a pot over a small brazier, an old man sitting in a patch of sunlight, children crowded into a room so small you can't imagine how they all fit. You pass a fountain, and the crowd around it is dense, women with jars on their shoulders or balanced on their heads, waiting their turn, men drinking directly from the flow, children splashing each other, laughing. The water looks clear and cold, flowing continuously from a bronze spout. This is the aqua marcia, someone had told you, the good water. You make a mental note of the location. A shop catches your eye, a thermopolium, one of those fast food counters you'd read about. The counter faces the street with several large clay jars set into it. Steam rises from the jars. A man stands behind the counter, ladling something into a bowl for a customer. The customer, a labourer in a rough, short tunic, his arms and legs darkened by sun and dirt, takes the bowl and drinks from it, standing right there at the counter. He finishes quickly, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, drops a coin on the counter, and walks away. The whole transaction takes maybe 30 seconds. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten since yesterday. You approach the counter. The man behind it looks at you, his expression neutral, waiting. You try to remember the words, the phrases you'd practiced. "What do you have?" you ask in Latin, the words feeling strange and formal in your mouth. The man rattles off a list. Pulse, a grain porridge, some kind of stew with beans and vegetables, bread, wine. You point to the stew and the bread. He names a price, several asses. You're not sure if that's fair, but you nod and dig in your pouch for the coins. The bronze pieces are small and warm from your body heat. You hand them over. He counts them, nods, and ladles stew into a clay bowl, handing it to you along with a piece of bread that's darker and coarser than modern bread. You step away from the counter to make room for the next customer. The stew is hot, steaming in the bowl. You tear off a piece of bread and dip it in the liquid, then bring it to your mouth. The taste is strange, salty, very salty, with that pungent, fishy undertone that must be the garum. There are beans in it, soft and mealy, and some chunks of vegetable you can't identify. The bread is dense and slightly sour. It's not bad exactly, just different. You eat slowly, watching the street. A cart comes by, piled high with amphorae, those pointed clay jars used for storing wine or oil or fish sauce. The carter is shouting at people to get out of the way. A woman with a baby on her hip presses against the wall of a building to let the cart pass. A man leading a donkey laden with baskets of vegetables does the same. The cart rumbles by, wheels loud on the stone pavement, and then the crowd flows back into the street. You finish the stew and the bread. Your stomach feels oddly full and unsettled at the same time. You find a public latrine, a small structure with a stone bench that has holes cut in it, no doors, no privacy, and use it quickly, trying not to breathe through your nose. The Romans treat this as a social space, men sitting side by side, chatting while they relieve themselves. You can't bring yourself to linger. The sun is higher now, the heat building. You need to get your bearings, figure out where you are in relation to the major landmarks. You ask a man selling fruit from a cart how to get to the forum. He gives you directions, that way toward that hill, past the temple with the red roof, and you set off, your companions following. The streets are a maze. They twist and turn, narrow alleyways opening onto wider streets that then narrow again. Some streets are in shadow, cool and damp, while others are in full sun, almost blindingly bright. You get turned around twice, have to ask for directions again. A woman selling garlands of flowers points you the right direction. An old man sitting in a doorway corrects you when you start down the wrong street. You pass a bakery, and the smell of fresh bread is powerful enough to cut through the other scents. Through the doorway you can see the interior, a brick oven, glowing red with heat. A man with a long wooden paddle pulling out round loaves. Another man is kneading dough on a table, his arms white with flour up to the elbows. Several customers are waiting, coins ready. The bread here smells better than what you had at the Thermopolium. You make a mental note to come back. A small temple sits at an intersection, just a simple structure with columns and a statue of some god you don't recognize. Several people stop as they pass, dropping coins into a collection box or bowing their heads briefly in prayer. You do the same, not wanting to stand out. The statue's eyes seem to follow you as you leave. The forum, when you finally reach it, is staggering. You've seen reconstructions, read descriptions, but none of that prepared you for the reality. It's an enormous open space, paved in marble, surrounded by temples and basilicas and administrative buildings, all of it gleaming white and gold in the late morning sun. Statues everywhere, bronze figures of emperors and gods, marble portraits on pedestals, monuments commemorating battles and triumphs, columns reaching skyward, their capitals carved with elaborate designs, roofs tiled in bronze that catch the light like fire, and people, hundreds of people, maybe thousands filling the forum. Senators in togas with purple stripes, moving in groups, attendants following with scroll cases and wax tablets, merchants arguing over contracts, lawyers delivering speeches in the basilicas, their voices echoing off marble walls. People gathered around statues reading the inscriptions aloud to those who can't read. Beggars sitting against walls, hands extended. Children running between the columns, playing. A procession of priests in white robes chanting, making their way toward a temple. Slaves carrying loads, hurrying on errands for their masters. Women in long stolas and pallas, their hair elaborately styled, walking with measured dignity. The noise is incredible. Voices in Latin, Greek, a dozen other languages. Laughter and shouting and the rhythmic sound of hammering from somewhere. Construction never stops in Rome, you remember reading. Birds wheel overhead, crows and gulls calling to each other. From somewhere nearby comes the sound of a flute, someone playing for coins. You stand at the edge of the forum trying to take it all in. One of your companions touches your arm, points toward the rostra, the speaker's platform. A man is delivering a speech, gesturing dramatically, his voice carrying across the forum. A small crowd has gathered to listen. You can't hear clearly enough to understand what he's saying from this distance, but whatever it is, he's passionate about it. You walk through the forum slowly, trying not to gape. You pass the Temple of Saturn, its columns massive, the steps leading up to it worn smooth by centuries of feet. A group of men stands on the steps, deep in conversation, occasionally gesturing to emphasize points. You pass the Temple of Vesta, where the sacred flame burns that must never go out. You can see smoke rising from inside. A commotion draws your attention. A kissed group of men in togas are surrounding someone, voices raised in anger. You can't tell what the argument is about, but it's getting heated. People nearby are watching with interest. One man shoves another. Immediately several attendants step in, pulling the men apart, speaking urgently. The crowd murmurs. Slowly the tension deflates. The men separate, still glaring at each other, and the crowd disperses. Conflict in the forum is apparently entertainment. The sun is high now, nearly midday, and the heat is intense. The marble of the forum reflects the light, almost painful to look at. You're sweating heavily, your tunic sticking to your back. You need to find shade, something to drink. You leave the forum, heading back into the narrower streets where buildings block some of the sun. You find a vendor selling drinks, watered wine in cups, kept in a clay jar. You buy a cup. The wine is sharp and acidic, cut with so much water it barely tastes alcoholic, but it's wet and cool and that's what matters. You drink it quickly, then buy another cup. A man approaches you, speaking quickly in Latin. You catch maybe half of what he's saying. Something about merchandise, about prices, about an opportunity. He's a merchant trying to sell you something or make some kind of deal. You shake your head, tell him you're not interested. He persists for a moment, then shrugs and moves on to the next likely-looking target. From somewhere nearby comes a roar, not animal, but human. Thousands of voices raised at once, a wave of sound that rolls across the city, the games, the Colosseum. Your heart beats faster. That's what you came for, isn't it? To see something that doesn't exist in your own time. To witness what Rome was really like. You ask for directions. The vendor points. That way, toward the massive structure that dominates the skyline. You and your companion set off. The streets near the Colosseum are even more crowded than the Forum. Everyone is heading the same direction, drawn by the spectacle. The crowd carries you forward, pressing in on all sides. You can smell sweat and garlic and wine on people's breath. A man accidentally elbows you in the ribs. A woman steps on your foot. You try to keep your hand on your money pouch, acutely aware of pickpockets. And then you're there, standing in front of the Colosseum, looking up at its massive facade. The building curves away in both directions. Impossible to see the whole thing from this angle. The arches are huge, leading into darkness inside. The stone is cream-coloured, almost glowing in the sunlight. The upper levels are decorated with columns and statues. The scale of it is overwhelming. You've seen large buildings before, but nothing like this. This was built by hand, by human labour, stone stacked on stone, and it seems impossible that anyone could have made something this vast. The crowd flows toward the entrances. The noise increases. Music from somewhere, vendors shouting their wares, people calling to friends, children crying, laughter, arguments. The sound of thousands of people all trying to move through limited space. You let yourself be carried forward, through an arch, into the shadowed interior. The passageways inside are brick and stone, curving, leading upward through stairwells and corridors. It's cooler in here, out of the direct sun, but the air is stuffy, thick with the breath of thousands of people. The smell of bodies is intense. You climb stairs, following the flow of the crowd, emerging eventually into the seating area. The light hits you first, blinding after the dim corridors. You blink, raising a hand to shade your eyes, and then you see the arena. It spreads out below you, an enormous oval of sand, golden in the sunlight. The arena floor is perhaps 70 meters across, maybe more. The walls surrounding it are at least 5 meters high, faced with smooth marble. Above the walls, the seating rises in tiers, row after row after row, curving around the oval, climbing higher and higher until the top rows seem impossibly far away. And every seat, every single space, is filled with people. 50,000 people, maybe more. All of them here, all of them making noise, talking, laughing, shouting, singing, arguing. The sound is physical, pressing against your eardrums, vibrating in your chest. You've never heard anything like it. It's like standing next to a waterfall made of human voices. Vendors are moving through the aisles, selling food and drink. You can smell roasted meat, wine, something sweet. People are eating and drinking, passing items back and forth, completely casual. Children are sitting on parents' laps. Groups of men are joking with each other, clapping each other on the back. Women in fine clothing sit in the better sections, slaves holding parasols over them to provide shade. You find a place to stand. There are no seats left in the sections you can access without paying more, and wait. The sun beats down. The marble seating reflects heat upward. You're cooking, sweat running down your face, down your back. Everyone around you is in the same state, red-faced and sweating, but no one seems to care. A trumpet sounds, bright and clear, cutting through the noise. The crowd's volume increases, a surge of excitement. Something is happening. Gates open at one end of the arena and figures emerge into the sunlight. Gladiators. They're wearing armour that glints in the sun, some in bronze, some in leather with metal reinforcement. They carry weapons, swords, tridents, nets, shields of different sizes and shapes. They march around the perimeter of the arena in formation, and the crowd roars approval, thousands of voices blending into one massive sound that makes your bones vibrate. The gladiators stop in front of the imperial box, or where it would be if the emperor were present today, you're not sure. They raise their weapons in salute, and then they separate, moving to different positions around the arena. A man near you is explaining to his companion what types of gladiators they are. You catch some of the words: Mamillo, Retiarius, Thraex. Different fighting styles, different equipment. The crowd has favourites, apparently. People are shouting names, cheering for particular fighters. A signal is given and the fights begin. 2 men meet in the centre of the arena. One has a sword and a large rectangular shield. That's the Mamillo, you think. The other has a net and a trident, the Retiarius. They circle each other, cautious. The crowd is screaming advice, encouragement, insults. The Retiarius makes a move, swinging his net. The Mamillo dodges, but barely. The netman recovers, backs away, trident held ready. They circle again. The tension is unbearable. 50,000 people are watching these 2 men decide whether to kill each other or be killed. The Mamillo charges, shield up. The Retiarius tries to entangle him with the net, but the shield blocks it. They're close now, grappling. The sword flashes. Blood appears on the Retiarius's arm, dark red against his skin. The crowd roars. The wounded man staggers back. The Mamillo presses his advantage, shield slamming into the netman, knocking him off balance. The Retiarius falls, lands hard on the sand. The Mamillo is on him instantly, sword at his throat. Everything stops. The Retiarius raises his hand, index finger extended. The crowd noise changes quality, becomes a roar of debate. People are shouting, gesturing, thumbs up, thumbs down, hands waving. You can't tell which way the decision is going. The noise is too chaotic. After what feels like an eternity but is probably only seconds, officials in the arena make some kind of signal. The Mamillo steps back. The Retiarius is allowed to stand. He's wounded but alive. He stumbles toward the gate, clutching his bleeding arm. The crowd boos and cheers in roughly equal measure. More fights follow. Some are quick, brutal, over in minutes. Others drag on, both men exhausted, barely able to lift their weapons, until one finally lands a decisive blow. The sand of the arena floor is darker now in patches, stained with blood. Between fights, slaves come out with rakes, smoothing the sand, covering the worst of the stains. The heat is unbearable. Your head is pounding from the noise and the sun. Your throat is dry despite the wine you drank. You're starting to feel dizzy, nauseated, but you can't look away. They bring out animals: boars, deer, a bear. Men with spears hunt them in the arena while the crowd cheers. The animals are terrified, running in circles, trying to escape. There is no escape. The hunters are efficient. Soon the animals are dead, dragged away by teams of slaves with hooks. More gladiators. The quality of the fights varies enormously. Some are clearly skilled, professional, their movements practiced and deliberate. Others seem barely trained, desperate men swinging wildly, hoping to connect. The crowd reacts. Accordingly, appreciative gasps for the skilled displays, bored jeering for the clumsy matches. A man 2 rows below you is eating something greasy from a paper cone, oil dripping down his fingers. The smell makes your stomach turn. You need to leave. You need air, water, shade. This experience is too intense, too hot, too loud, too much death displayed as entertainment. But you stay, because this is why you came. This is Rome. Not the marble and the monuments, not the forum or the temples, but this. 50,000 people screaming for blood, watching men kill each other for entertainment, eating and drinking and treating it as a casual afternoon's activity. This is what Rome was. Magnificent and terrible, beautiful and brutal, a culture that could create the Aeneid and also create this. The games continue into the afternoon, fight after fight, death after death. The blood on the sand is no longer covered between matches. The bodies are dragged out and new fighters come in, and it continues endless, until finally, hours later, the last match ends and the crowd begins to disperse. You flow out with the masses, back through the corridors into the street, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. Your legs are unsteady. Your head is still ringing with noise. You need to sit down somewhere quiet, somewhere you can process what you just witnessed. But Rome doesn't do quiet. The streets are still crowded, still noisy, the city continuing its endless activity as if nothing unusual just happened. Because for Rome, nothing unusual did happen. This was just another day. You find your way to a small plaza with a fountain, grateful for the shade of the buildings that surround it. You sit on the edge of the fountain's basin, splash water on your face and neck. The water is cool, slightly metallic tasting. Your companions sit nearby, everyone quiet, processing. No one speaks of what you just saw. What is there to say? After a while, you force yourself to stand. The day isn't over yet, and there's more to see. Your body aches. Your feet hurt from walking on stone streets. Your back hurts from standing in the sun for hours. Your head still throbs. But you didn't come all this way to spend the afternoon sitting by a fountain. You decide to visit the baths. The baths of Trajan are nearby, someone tells you. The massive complex sprawls across several city blocks, its walls faced with brick, its roof tiled in terracotta. You approach the entrance, joining the flow of people heading in. A sign lists the admission price, a quadrans, the smallest coin. You dig in your pouch and produce the tiny bronze piece. Inside, the entrance hall is enormous, the ceiling vaulted high overhead. The space echoes with voices, laughter, the slap of sandals on marble floors. The air is warm and humid, carrying scents of oil and sweat and something herbal. Perfume, maybe, or scented oil. People are everywhere, moving with the ease of long familiarity. This is their daily routine, their social club, their gathering place. You follow the flow toward the changing rooms, the appetiterium. The space is lined with niches and cubbyholes where people store their clothes. Several slaves stand guard, watching for thieves, but from the conversations around you, theft is still a major concern. Everyone is warning their companions to keep an eye on belongings. One of your companions volunteers to stay in the changing room to watch everyone's things. You're grateful. You undress, folding your tunic and placing it in a cubbyhole. Your coins you keep in a small pouch that you tie around your wrist. No way you're leaving those unguarded. Naked now, surrounded by dozens of other naked people, you feel exposed and strange. But no one pays you any attention. Bodies of all types are here. Young and old, fat and thin, muscular and soft, scarred and smooth. Romans are completely unself-conscious about nudity in this context. You move into the tepidarium, the warm room. The air temperature is pleasant, comfortably warm, the humidity rising. Marble floors, marble walls, marble benches along the sides. Perhaps 30 or 40 people are in this room, some sitting and talking, others moving through toward the hotter rooms. A group of men is engaged in what sounds like a business negotiation. 2 women are laughing about something, their voices echoing. A slave moves through the room with a tray of small cups, wine being sold. You decline. The caldarium is next. The heat hits you the moment you enter, intense and moist, like walking into a wall of warm water. Steam rises from pools set into the floor, obscuring the far side of the room. The moisture condenses on the marble surfaces, running down in rivulets. People are sitting on the edges of the hot pools, legs dangling in the water, or standing in groups, their skin red from the heat. Slaves move through the steam like ghosts, offering services, massages, oil and strigils, hair plucking. You ease yourself into one of the hot pools. The water is shockingly hot, almost painful at first, but your body adjusts quickly. You sit on a submerged ledge, water up to your chest. The heat seeps into your muscles, loosening knots you didn't know you had. You close your eyes and let yourself float in the sensation. Someone sits next to you, starts a conversation. A middle-aged man with a belly that speaks of prosperity. He asks where you're from in conversational Latin. You give your practiced answer. Ephesus, a merchant, visiting Rome on business. He nods, launches into a story about his own trip to Asia Minor years ago. You half listen, making appropriate noises. He doesn't really need you to participate, just someone to talk at. This is what the baths are for: connection, conversation, the reinforcement of social bonds. After the heat becomes too intense, you pull yourself out of the pool. A slave approaches immediately, offering his services with a small jar of oil and a strigil. You nod, and he goes to work. He pours oil over your shoulders, works it into your skin with practiced hands, then begins scraping it off with the curved metal blade. The strigil makes a peculiar sound as it moves across your skin, and the sensation is strange. Not unpleasant exactly, but foreign. The oil and sweat and dirt come off in disgusting grey-brown streaks that the slave wipes onto a cloth. You realise you've been far dirtier than you thought. A day in Rome will do that. The cold plunge pool is a shock after the heat. The frigidarium is cooler than the other rooms, and the pool is genuinely cold. You see people jump in with shouts and laughter, thrashing in the water briefly before climbing out. You follow their example and the cold takes your breath away. Your heart races. You stay in for maybe 10 seconds before hauling yourself out, gasping. Your skin tingles all over. Back in the tepidarium to warm up gradually. You sit on a marble bench, your body going through temperature readjustment. Around you, Rome's citizens are living their lives. Business deals are being struck. Gossip is being exchanged. Friendships are being reinforced. Marriages are being arranged. A philosopher is holding forth to a small group about Stoic principles of virtue. 2 young men are arguing about chariot racing, their voices rising in passion. An elderly woman is complaining to anyone who will listen about her son-in-law. You spend perhaps an hour in the baths, moving between rooms, observing the social dynamics, occasionally dipping back into the warm water. Eventually you return to the changing room, retrieve your clothes from your companion who looks bored but alert. You dress, feeling cleaner than you have since you arrived, and head back out into the late afternoon sun. The city has changed quality with the advancing afternoon. The heat has peaked and is beginning to fade slightly, though it's still warm. Long shadows stretch across the streets. The light is golden, softer than the harsh midday glare. The crowds seem less frantic, the pace slightly slower. People are returning home from work, stopping at Thermopylae for early dinner, gathering in small groups to talk. You wander through a residential neighbourhood, away from the major landmarks. The streets here are narrower, quieter. Apartment buildings rise on both sides, 4 and 5 stories high, their facades painted in fading colours, red ochre, yellow, pale blue. Laundry still hangs from windows. You can hear domestic sounds. A woman singing, a baby crying, someone practicing a flute with more enthusiasm than skill, pots and pans clanging, voices raised in argument. Through an open doorway you glimpse a family at dinner. They're reclining on couches arranged around a low table, just as you'd read about. The father in the centre position, his wife to one side, older children on other couches. Slaves are serving dishes, bringing food from somewhere deeper in the house. The family is talking, laughing. It's such a normal scene, so domestic and familiar despite the strangeness of the setting and the postures. People are people, you think, across all of time. A shop catches your attention. A jeweller's, with necklaces and rings displayed on a table facing the street. The proprietor, a thin man with quick eyes, invites you to look. You examine the pieces, careful not to touch without permission. Some are simple bronze or copper, others silver, a few gold. The workmanship varies from crude to quite fine. A silver ring catches your eye, simple design, a flat top engraved with an image of Mercury. You ask the price. The jeweller names a figure. It's probably too much, but you're tired of haggling. You count out the coins and take the ring, slipping it onto your finger. A souvenir, if you can bring it back with you. Proof that you were really here. The streets are busier now as evening approaches. Workers are finished for the day, the shops are beginning to close their shutters. People are heading home or to taverns or to dinner appointments. You pass a small wine shop, not a fancy place, just a counter with barrels and cups, and stop for a drink. The wine is better than what you had from the street vendor, less watered down, with a pleasant fruity taste and only a hint of that resinous flavour from the amphora it was stored in. A man at the counter starts a conversation with you. He's a carpenter heading home after a day of work on a rich man's villa. His hands are scarred and calloused, his forearms strong. He complains about his employer, who keeps changing his mind about the designs, making him redo work. You commiserate. He asks about your work. You tell him the merchant story. He nods, buys you another cup of wine, and asks about goods from the East. What do they have there that Rome needs? Silk, you tell him. Spices. Glass from Syria. He's fascinated, asks more questions. You answer as best you can, inventing details when necessary. He seems satisfied with your answers, unaware that you're making up most of it. The sun is lower now, touching the tops of the buildings. The light is turning amber, then orange. Cooking fires are being lit. You can see smoke beginning to rise from thousands of buildings, and the smell of food is thick in the air. Bread baking, meat roasting, oil heating, onions frying. Your stomach reminds you that you've eaten very little today, despite all the walking and standing. You find another thermopolium, this one busier than the morning place. The counter is crowded with workers getting their evening meal. The food on offer is similar: stew, porridge, bread, wine. You order stew again, and bread, and this time it tastes better. Maybe you're hungrier, or maybe this place has a better cook. The stew has chunks of sausage in it, fatty and well seasoned, and the bread is fresh and still warm. You eat standing at the counter, elbows bumping with strangers on both sides, everyone eating quickly and efficiently. Full now, tired, you make your way toward one of the city gates. The streets are darker, the sun has set, and the only light comes from torches and oil lamps in windows and doorways. The temperature is dropping noticeably. People are still out, but fewer now, and they move in groups. You're glad you're not alone. A temple sits at an intersection, its columns dark against the deep blue sky. A priestess stands on the steps, a lamp in her hand, chanting something in a language you don't understand, probably very archaic Latin or perhaps Etruscan, remnants of older religions incorporated into Roman practice. A few people stop to observe, heads bowed. The moment feels sacred, timeless, a connection to something ancient even by Roman standards. You pass through a gate in the old city wall. Beyond it, the countryside opens up, darker than the city but not entirely black. Farmhouses show lights in windows. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. The stars are beginning to appear, brighter than you've ever seen them, unobscured by any electric light. The Milky Way is a river of light across the sky. You walk for perhaps half an hour, leaving the city behind, heading for the forest where you arrived this morning. It feels like weeks ago. Your body is exhausted, feet blistered, legs aching, back sore, head still throbbing slightly from the sun, and the noise and the overwhelming sensory experience of Rome. The forest is dark and cool, smelling of earth and leaves and growing things. You find the spot where you hid the device, right where you left it, undisturbed. You retrieve it, the metal cold and impossibly smooth against your hands, a piece of your own time in this ancient place. Your companions gather round. No one speaks. What is there to say? You've seen Rome, not the idealized Rome of movies and books, but the real thing. The beautiful and the ugly, the magnificent and the brutal, the marble temples and the blood-soaked sand, the sublime poetry and the casual cruelty, the engineering marvels and the open sewers. You've seen a living city at the height of its power, 1,000,000 people crammed into a space that could barely contain them, from every corner of the known world, speaking dozens of languages, worshipping hundreds of gods. You've seen the best and worst of human civilization existing side by side, often in the same building, sometimes in the same person. You've smelled the garum and the sweat and the incense and the roses. You've heard the roar of 50,000 voices in the Colosseum. You've felt the heat of the caldarium and the shock of the frigidarium. You've tasted bread and wine and stew that Romans ate 2,000 years ago. You've walked on the same stones, touched the same marble, looked up at the same temples that generations of Romans knew. And now it's time to go home. You activate the device. The world shimmers, light bends in ways that light shouldn't bend, and everything shifts and changes and becomes something else. The forest is the same but different. The air smells different, cleaner, emptier, less alive. The silence is profound and mechanical, not the living silence of the ancient world, but the dead silence of modernity, with its white noise of engines and electronics. You're home, and Rome is gone, or rather, it's back in the past where it belongs, waiting for other travellers, eternal and impossible and real. And with that, your journey back in time is over. We hope you enjoyed your visit to ancient Rome and learned a thing or two about what life was really like in the Eternal City at the height of its power. If you'd like to travel to another time and place, we hope you'll return to our channel for more journeys through history. The remainder of this video will be the calm, relaxing sound of a crackling fire if you want to drift off to sleep or simply ponder your journey. Thanks again for tuning in with Time Travelling History, and we wish you a peaceful night.